Chad McMaster, and today we are going to look at the two different types of tipping systems that could be in play within the American economy. This is called gracious gratuities, a look at the tipping system. To tip or not to tip? If I were a betting man, I would say that the majority of folks that will watch this video have been to a restaurant, if not very recently, but definitely once before, if not many times. A lot of the average consumers in America rely on restaurants for maybe a once or twice weekly meal, a carryout option. There are a lot of different ways that a consumer can be involved with a restaurant atmosphere. Our big question is, why does your tip matter? Wait staff, or servers as I like to call them, within restaurants generally earn the overwhelming majority of their money based off of tipped income. They generally actually don't receive a paycheck at all. The United States is very different from the rest of the world with their tipping culture. We're actually one of the few countries that still do not include tipping into our menu prices. And that's definitely a very common theme for Americans. It's very unique to kind of go overseas or go to a European country and learn that you actually are not supposed to tip. It is already included within your menu prices that you pay. So we're definitely a very different country from a vast part of the world in terms of how our tipping culture and restaurant culture operates. We're going to examine the ideas of including gratuities and kind of look at the positives and negatives of that and how some different businesses and restaurants have fared in the past from trying to make these switches. And we're going to examine what is the best tipping system, if the current one in place is probably the most ideal situation, or if there may be a better one. The server financials, or the waitstaff, if you will, are the servers are going to be one of the groups in the restaurant industry that are going to be probably the most heavily affected directly by a switch from tipping to non-tipping. As I mentioned, servers generally don't get paychecks at all. They are completely wiped out by taxes that are paid on the tips that they have earned. Servers even generally end up owing money when it comes to tax time as well. A lot of servers noted a drastic change in income when switching from a tipping to a non-tipping restaurant format. One server from a New York City restaurant group that had switched from tipping to non-tipping reported that she had usually earned in a range of $60,000 annually as a career server. The first year of the non-tipping format, she saw almost a 20% drop to $50,000 annually. This could definitely cause a lot of issues, as servers are typically accustomed to changes in the amount of income they see from year to year. I think we all could agree that seeing a 20% drop or something close to that when you had no idea that was going to happen is a little bit tough to deal with. Another big issue for restaurants and the staff was really high turnover. A lot of new hires that non-tipping restaurants had taken on after learning how the format kind of worked out would often leave to go back to more traditional formats. And a lot of these restaurants that have switched to no tipping would also experience high turnover in their experienced staff that have been with the location for years on end in order to leave and go to a location that does have tipping. The switch to non-tipping. So many restaurants began to switch back in 2015. There were definitely restaurants that had tried to switch before then, and I'm sure there will be some that will continue to try to make the switch. But there was a big push in the range of 2015 to 2016 where a lot of restaurants tried to undergo that change. Within the next 2 to 3 years, most of the restaurants of some of these larger, more prominent restaurant groups around the country had reverted back to the traditional tipping methods. A few restaurateurs who are notable that attempted the switch, Danny Meyer was one that came up quite often. He is known for as being the Shake Shack founder and CEO. He also has a number of restaurants around the country. A lot of them are centralized in New York and California. Danny tried to switch 11 of his locations to non-tipping, a lot of which within 2 to 3 years were switched back to traditional formats. Many thought that he would be one that could kind of lead the push for switching with, as being seen as kind of a visionary and obviously having a lot of firepower in terms of number of restaurants around the country. However, he even experienced quite a few troubles while trying to make the switch to a non-tipping location. Thad Vogler was another restaurateur in California who also experienced quite a few changes at a few locations and within 2 years had reverted back to traditional tipping methods. Cost of non-tipping is very huge for the restaurant and the employee. For restaurants that do accept tips, as it currently stands, they're lucky to net 15% profit consistently. If you're doing anything in the range of 15 to 20% at the end of the day, that is a successful endeavor for a restaurant. Labor costs at the minimum are 20 to 25% in restaurants that accept tipping. Generally, I would say they're probably even closer to 25 to 30 to 35%, and that is with tipping in place. For the restaurants that do away with the tipping and switch to the non-tipping format, they raise the food and beverage prices to include gratuity. Although it seems like a pretty easy switch on paper, we'll talk about a few of the guest perception issues that were experienced when raising these prices. Although it seems like an easy switch, there's just more legwork involved. There's a little more of everything to do, and it was not an overall easy experience, as some may have originally thought. So the guest perception of non-tipping is obviously very important. The guest is the most important aspect of your business. Without the guest, the restaurants don't operate. There's no food to sell. There's no beverages to sell. If no one comes in, you're not going to make it. So obviously what the guests think of this is very important. The higher menu prices actually led to less product being ordered. Although the guests were in non-tipping establishments, not expected to leave any money at the end because it was already built into the prices, the guests would view those prices as just being higher overall and would typically order less product. Along with that, the non-tipping locations kind of have a more expensive perception overall. There was a study conducted on customer reviews left on various sites, including Yelp, Joe's Crab Shack's own websites, among other restaurant review websites, for 36 different Joe's Crab Shack locations. 18 were switched to non-tipping locations, and 18 were tipped locations that were in similar demographics, areas, etc. The study generally showed that the non-tipping locations had worse reviews, whether it was regarding the menu prices, the service, or just their general experience. The reviews as a whole were much less successful than the tipped locations received. Consumers generally like to be able to determine a tip at the end. They like to have the ability to leave one. It's a really powerful part of their experience, and it is very beneficial for them to be able to, tip someone more or leave, a good sum of money, when they felt that someone has been exceptional and really has gone above and beyond. A few flaws in the system, if you will. So a few flaws in the tipping system. The discrimination is for the server or guest is definitely a problem with our current system. Servers of certain ethnicities or races can receive less tip than a person or another server of an ethnicity or a different race. Whether their service was better, the same, they often can experience issues with discrimination factors towards the server as well as the guest. A group of guests that may be known as or perceived as worse tippers may get worse service and less attentive service than a group of guests who are perceived as better tippers. That is obviously not a correct or fair way to handle that. Income inequality is also a big driving force. Front of house staff obviously can make a lot of money on a really busy night. The back of house staff on that same busy night is going to make the same amount of money. And that it was a problem that a lot of these progressive restaurateurs were trying to solve. As far as non-tipping goes, we talked about the higher prices that are included, and it leads to a negative guest perception. It leads to more front of house staff turnover, and it involves added processes for staff and management, and the higher labor costs from the restaurant paying out the what were the tips to wait staff result in lower profit margins. So what is the best system? At the moment, I think the current tipping system is the best option for how the American consumer is wired. Could non-tipping work? I absolutely think it could. The only thing is I think it's going to require a lot of restaurants, a huge amount of restaurants to undertake the idea at the same time, which does not seem like it's going to happen anytime soon. There are definitely some great benefits to it, but at the moment, if just a few places are trying to do it, the overall incentives are not going to kick in. Tipping provides extra incentive for the server. It does generally lead to some servers that handle it better being more attentive and working the extra mile to provide better service. Although, as I mentioned, I don't think it's the best overall system. I think the current system as it stands is the best option for now. Tip accepting establishments really provide a greater chance of success, not only for the server, but for the restaurant as well. As your profit margins are lower, your costs are a little bit lower, you can typically make and profit a little bit more money through that method. And as a former compensation-based employee, I can definitely attest to the fact that the ability to not earn a flat rate would absolutely drive me to, offer better service or provide a better experience for someone within, or for a guest within my restaurant. And that is my thoughts on including or not including gratuities.